I'm going to show you how to change the transmission fluid and filter on an automatic transmission. Process is very similar to many vehicles, but right now I have a 2016 Mazda CX-5. So the first thing we want to do is locate the transmission fluid fill hole and dipstick, which is that plastic gray thing with the nut holding it down. We're going to have to undo that 10mm bolt and pull it out. So we got our extension with our 10mm on the end. Just get that down there and undo the bolt, and the dipstick comes right out. And that reading on there is not the genuine reading. There is a process to checking the transmission fluid, which we will go over at the end of the video when it's full again. But the fluid needs to be where that little middle square was on the dipstick. And I have a thermometer here because that's part of the fluid checking procedure. But the first thing we do to empty the fluid is take off the black plastic covering for the bottom undercarriage. As you can see, this one's already damaged, but we're just going to take it off to make it a little easier. Where the hole is in the underliner is the fill pan, the fluid pan for the automatic transmission filter right ahead now. And that is the drain plug right there, which is an 8mm Allen key. But before you drain it, make sure you have a fill drain plug gasket. Part number right here, same as the oil. Here's the 8mm Allen key, which we're going to undo the transmission fluid pan drain plug with. And we're just going to drain that automatic transmission fluid out. You're not going to get all the fluid out with this procedure. You're going to get about half, and we'll get a little more once the pan is off. I believe the system has around 8 quarts, so we're going to get about 4.5 here. And with that drained out, you can see how dirty it was. They say that this is lifetime fluid for the transmission, but it doesn't seem that way. There are 16 bolts holding the pan on. We're going to have to undo all of those. They are also 10mm bolts. So I'm going to go ahead and take all but the corners out to hold the pan there. So I just have 3 corners on right now, 3 bolts in the corners. The rest are out, and they're undone a little bit so that this pan could move, but I'm just going to whack it with this dead blow hammer to break that RTV gasket seal. And it took me a while to do this, but it wasn't that bad. It did eventually come loose. You can see it moving a little bit. Yep, it's loose now. So we're going to be gentle with the pan because there's more fluid in there. But we're going to start taking the corner bolts out and remove the pan. So I remove one corner, and it's just held on with my hand and the last corner bolt. And the pan is off, and that red is the old RTV that was holding the pan on. Just drain that fluid out and take the pan to your workbench. But underneath, you can see that's our automatic transmission, and that black thing you briefly saw was the filter we're going to remove. Here's the pan. It's pretty dirty. The fluid was really dirty. A lot of metal shavings in it. It's kind of normal for this, but also not that good of a sign. So we're going to clean that magnet off so it can start collecting more metal pieces again as the transmission wears even further. But this red RTV needs to come off completely without damaging the pan. But before we get into that, we're going to go ahead and take this filter out to drain out any more fluid. 2 10mm bolts hold this black plastic filter housing on. So we take off those 10mm. And then it's held in with a couple of rubber O-rings, so just pull that out. Like I said earlier, some more fluid's going to fall out, and just drain out the filter. You want to drain out the filter because we're going to measure how much fluid came out just to get a reference point. But this Red Tools is a non-marring scraper. We're going to use that in combination with some isopropyl alcohol to hopefully break free all this old RTV that was installed on the factory. So just wipe it down, get the oil off, and start scraping. It took a long time to do this, about an hour on the pan and about an hour under the car on the transmission housing. But you need to not scratch the surfaces at all. That's why you want to use a non-marring plastic tool that can help scrape this off. And you just got to keep working at it, hitting it with the rubbing alcohol, rubbing it off. It's old, so eventually you can just kind of rub it off, but you can see here it's very clean. You don't want to have to do this again. So here's the part number for the new filter. It's called strainer. So with that all cleaned up in the pan, we're going to put these 10mm bolts back in and put the filter back on the transmission. So you just want to tighten these bolts down. It's about 7 foot-pounds, so just nice and snug. You do not want to over tighten these and break them once they're in. Make sure you're not cross-threading it too, very important. You don't want to mess with this. But with those bolts tightened, the filter is good to go.
Okay.
And we're just going to keep wiping down those surfaces. Near the back, what would be the farthest point of the case, oil kept kind of falling on the mating surface. So you got to really get up in the transmission and make sure there's no oil falling down or about to fall down from the time that we wipe it clean to the time we put the pan on. So with that wiped down, I'm going to apply the Mazda RTV gray, a thick bead all around all the holes and around the pan to make a consistent seal. And you don't want any gaps in this, and it needs to be pretty solid just so it barely squirts out. So we're going to wipe it down one more final time, make sure there's no oil falling down or about to fall down for a few minutes. So we're going to really get up on the edge and get in there, and then we just mount it back to the holes, put all the bolts in, the 16 bolts, 10mm, just hand tight so that you can see the RTV starting to squeeze out. That's good. You just want to get it nice and snug, and we're going to go back and torque them down in a little bit. But while I'm here, I'm going to put in this drain plug, and I actually waited a long time to torque this so it wouldn't move the RTV, but this just needs to be torqued down to torque spec. I believe it's 25 foot-pounds, but look that up. And then with all that fluid that was in the pan, I actually measured it with a measuring cup, and it came out to 140 ounces. So I'm going to add at least that much, and it was low when I took the measurement beforehand, which I didn't show you, but we're going to have to add a little bit more than that. So I have this long funnel that reaches down in there to where the dipstick came out, and I'm going to pour 5 quarts in. And the dipstick is back, and we're just going to tighten it down so that it doesn't go anywhere. And we honestly should have a pretty close to the right amount of fluid in there, but we are going to go drive it and go through the proper procedure, which includes turning it on, driving it, getting the temperature up to 120 degrees, letting the transmission go through all the gears, and then checking the dipstick with the engine running in park. So after driving it and leaving the engine on, we come back and we look under the car to make sure it's not leaking, which it's not. And we're going to undo that dipstick. And we're going to take a fluid reading. So with it in park, going through all the gears, and I'll show you how it's 120 degrees, 120, 22. So it's just a little shy. It's just that couple notches below that middle square. It just needs about 4 more ounces of fluid. But just to verify we did do it right, we take our thermometer and we just stick it in that hole, and we take a temperature reading. I did this with the car off. I just knew it was already pretty close. But you can see we're at 121 degrees, so that reading was pretty accurate. So we're just going to add the little bit more fluid, check it again, and we're good to go. Automatic transmission fluid and filter is now changed.